ritual and ceremony that have been decades in the planning. The carefully choreographed set of events begins this morning. I'm Heather Hiscox. Good morning and welcome to our special continuing coverage on CBC News Network, on CBC Television, and live streaming on CBCNews.ca. On this morning, after the news that is bringing an outpouring of tributes to Queen Elizabeth II, ushering a new era for a new monarch. God save the King, something we have not heard for more than 70 years. That moment as mourners gathered last night outside Buckingham Palace, singing in tribute to now King Charles III. We're looking live now at Aberdeen Airport and watching for the King and the Queen to depart for London from Balmoral. They spent the night there and are going to be traveling to the airport to be transported to London to begin a day of what will be an extraordinary couple of weeks of ceremony and remembrance. We have Dominic Velitis in London and Abby Kugathasan in Edinburgh because there are major stories to be covered this morning from both of those locations. And Dominic, as I begin with you, the country waking up. I mentioned hearing God Save the King for the first time in 70 years. First time in that time, a full day without Queen Elizabeth on the throne. It's a very different feeling for those people as they place flowers. What is the latest we are learning?
Yeah, you're quite right, Heather. A very different feeling today. It is a very sombre day, a very sad day. A state of mourning has now officially begun here in the UK, and part of that is a period of royal mourning. And a short while ago, Heather, we received more details from Buckingham Palace on what that will look like, how that will play out. We've been told that it is King Charles's wish that the period of royal mourning will last from today until 7 days after the Queen's funeral, the date of which will be confirmed in due course. It will be observed, Heather, by members of the royal family, royal household staff and representatives of the royal household on official duties, together with troops which are committed to ceremonial duties. Now, later today, Heather, King Charles and his Queen Consort will return to London from Balmoral. One of the first things the King will do when he gets here is hold his first audience with Britain's Prime Minister Liz Truss. He's also expected to meet the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, who is in charge of the Queen's funeral arrangements. And we understand that King Charles will sign off on those arrangements today. And then this evening, Heather, we are expecting King Charles to address the nation in a televised speech during which he will pay tribute to his late mother and pledge to serve as head of state. Meanwhile, the House of Commons will convene today for a special session. It will start at noon, so in a couple of hours from now, instead of 9:30 as was originally planned. It will be led by the British Prime Minister Liz Truss and is expected to last until 10 p.m. tonight. And during the 10-hour session, MPs and peers will be invited to pay tribute to the Queen. The Prime Minister and senior government ministers will also attend a remembrance service at St Paul's Cathedral later today, after which we are expecting the government to confirm the length of national mourning, which, as I say, officially started today, and we think that will last around 12 days. One final point, Heather, the Queen's passing will also be marked today in central London with a royal gun salute at 1 p.m. local time, so 8 a.m. Eastern. 96 rounds, one for every year of the Queen's life, will be fired in tribute in Hyde Park and at the Tower of London. Churches here in the capital and across the country will also be marking the death of the Queen today at midday local time, 7 a.m. Eastern, so an hour or so from now. The bells at Westminster Abbey, St Paul's Cathedral and Windsor Castle will all toll in a coordinated tribute to the Queen. Churches across the land will be doing the same, with many being encouraged to open their doors for prayer and special services. So a busy day ahead, and of course a particularly sombre one too, Heather.
Dominic, thank you very much. Dominic is in London. These are live pictures from London, the gate, those famous gates to Buckingham Palace, as people gather to pay tribute. Now, many just going about their day, a period of official national mourning in the country, but going about their day, but many, of course, pausing particularly to reflect and to pay tribute to the Queen, who was the head of the country, the head of state, their queen for 70 years. The flowers they are placing, we know, are going to be put aside at Green Park. After 12 hours, they are expecting just to see a sea of floral tributes and special mementos and other remembrances to the Queen. As we keep a look at those pictures, Bonnie Brownlee is with me this morning, royal commentator, and Bonnie was with you all day yesterday. I'm so pleased to be able to share hours with you again today. Bonnie, what is your reaction? We've seen similar scenes, more and more people at Balmoral as well. But as we look at Buckingham Palace and you watch the people who are there to be there in the moment and to say, notably, thank you, what are you thinking?
I think I'm feeling the same as the people that are walking around Buckingham Palace. I think for a lot of people, it's a need to go. It's a need to sort of be part of it and just celebrate with strangers and, you know, fellow Brits and whoever else might be there from any other country in the world. I think people just need an outlet to show an appreciation, you know, for Her Majesty and what she brought to their lives. I think a lot of people don't realize what she meant to us, you know, what she really did for us, because it was so quiet and silent in so many ways. So I think this is a great tribute to her and, you know, hopefully to the rest of the members of the royal family.
Scenes like this we will be watching live for the next nearly 2 weeks, we would anticipate. The timeline not yet exactly established, but probably within about 11, 12 days, we will have the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. We have King Charles III already now, the King, and the King of Canada. And Bonnie, just help us understand the fact that he is now King. What does that change within the royal family as far as succession goes?
Well, it does get a little interesting because William and Harry are now sons of the sovereign. They are no longer the grandchildren, if you will. So their status changes, and William at some point will probably become the Prince of Wales. The sovereign will determine when that will happen. It's not as automatic, but it is. But there's always a technicality. But I think it's George V Convention in 1917 would say that William and Harry's children automatically become a prince and a princess. So what Harry and Meghan, you know, nothing's straightforward, but it does change the status of their children as well. And
so it would be Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, then it could be.
It could be, but they may have already chosen that they don't want that. So, but yes, their status has raised. And now, you know, Harry's sort of fifth in line, like he's not that far away, you know, after the 3 kids. So, and usually if you're above 6 in the line of succession, you are of interest and importance.
So let's linger on this point for a moment, because we've talked a lot about the rift within the royal family. Prince Harry and Meghan stepping back from royal duties, what a blow that was, and then coming back for the Platinum Jubilee, but again, some acrimony there too. Prince Harry did go to Balmoral yesterday. He has now been spotted at the airport, so he's left the castle. But could this be, Bonnie, in the tragedy of the loss of his grandmother, in some way, a moment of healing within the royal family?
I would think so. I could tell just by some people that I spoke with last night that it had been a good time for the family when they were all there last night. So that's encouraging. That's encouraging to hear. Will it heal everything? Time will tell.
Today, what will you be watching for specifically?
Curious about King Charles III's speech, what he is going to say to the nation, which I understand is around 6 p.m. and whoever else we may see of the royal family. Will we see some of them leaving Balmoral? I don't know yet, and where will they all be going, and what will they be doing? So, but today, is, as we've talked about earlier, is very much a focus on the new sovereign.
Bonnie, thank you very much. Bonnie Brownlee, I'll be back to you for more of your commentary. Really appreciate perspectives, as always, with me here in Toronto. Again, looking at the scene in Balmoral, more and more flowers, and we have seen really dozens of people make their trek, make their pilgrimage, really, to the main gate outside the Queen's beloved residence in the Scottish Highlands, and they are placing their flowers there, balloons, tributes, personal messages. 80% of the people in the UK have known only Queen Elizabeth. Now it will be King Charles for them, King Charles III, as they look to this whole new era. The Queen, we understand her body still in Balmoral, but we are going to watch over the next hours and days, first of all, as it is transported to Edinburgh. And Abby Kugathasan is there. She's outside the Palace of Holyrood House, the official residence of the monarchy in Scotland. And Abby, set the scene, if you would, for us there as you speak to people and look around what is happening there this morning.
Heather, as we were arriving, so were other journalists, not just from Scotland, not just from the United Kingdom, but from around the world as well. They're putting up barricades around the palace here, so that's some of the noise that you'll be hearing, because they are expecting large crowds to gather over the coming days. And we are seeing people sort of walk by the palace. They're stopping to take pictures, stopping to place flowers and notes. I spoke to a group of women who were walking by. They are originally from Australia. They live here in Scotland now. And I asked them for their thoughts on what's happened in the last 24 hours. And one of them said that she was in absolute shock, that the Queen has been a constant in her life, as the Queen has been for so many around the world over her 70-year reign, that she was just in shock that the Queen was no longer with us, that we no longer have a Queen at all, that there will be a king, that there is a king as of right now, that Charles will ascend to the throne. And she also spoke about the monarchy in general, that she felt that perhaps those who questioned the reason why this institution is still so revered will now give people pause and to think about the last 7 decades of the Queen's rule as well. So again, people walking by, leaving their notes, leaving their flowers, and we know that at some point the Queen's body will make its way from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and the first destination will be here, the Palace of Holyrood House. As you mentioned, the official residence of the monarch. Her body will rest here temporarily before going up the Royal Mile in Edinburgh to St. Giles's Cathedral. There is an expectation that there will be a service held there. Royal family members are expected to be there as well. Again, all of this has not yet been confirmed by Buckingham Palace. We are waiting for official confirmation, but these are some of the reports that we're hearing right now. And at some point, her body will either be flown by plane or taken by train back to London to Buckingham Palace.
You're in Scotland. The Queen loves Scotland and her summers at Balmoral. Tell us about why her heart was in the Highlands, Abby.
Balmoral has come up quite a bit during the Queen's reign. This was an estate that was purchased by Prince Albert for Queen Victoria quite a long time ago, of course, and it's been called one of the Queen Elizabeth II's favorite places. As a child, she spent time there with her parents and her sister, Princess Margaret. As a married woman, she went there with Prince Philip for a portion of their honeymoon. She also spent time there with her 4 children over the course of the years as well. And her grandchildren, Prince William, has recently said that he knew growing up that the Queen relished her time at the estate. Princess Eugenie said that she was most happy there. So certainly a place that brought her great happiness, great joy, and a time away from perhaps public life that she had to go through while she was in London. Balmoral, of course, in the Highland, a very private place. She was able to walk around with her dogs, picnic with her family. There are reports that Prince Philip was often behind the grill for some barbecues. So grand memories here, but of course there's also some sadness too when we think back to when Princess Diana died, because the Queen was at Balmoral when when that announcement came through. She was with Prince Charles and her grandsons, Prince William and Prince Harry. So certainly Balmoral, a very significant place in the royal family's lives. And certainly, of course, in the last couple of days, we've talked greatly about Balmoral because the Queen often spends her summers here, 3 months of the year. She's often there. And in the last couple of days, we saw in that final image with Liz Truss when she met with the incoming Prime Minister, still going through with the duties as Queen in her final days. And so, again, her body is at Balmoral. At some point, it will be moved here to Edinburgh.
A lifetime of service until Tuesday of this week, as you say, Abby, as she formally appointed her 15th Prime Minister at Balmoral. Abby Kugathasan is in Edinburgh for us and will be speaking again. Abby, live pictures of Buckingham Palace now with the flag at half-mast. We can tell you that not too far away at Westminster, 10 Downing Street, senior ministers in the government of Liz Truss have now begun to arrive, cabinet ministers at 10 Downing. And it's understood, what we're hearing from political reporters there's going to be a meeting. They will pay tribute to the Queen personally in the cabinet, and then in the Commons for several hours. It's going to be open, and MPs will be visiting and sharing reflections on the passing of the Queen. For 80% of the people of that country, the only Queen, the only monarch they have ever known. It is now King Charles III. And Peter Johnston is here with me from London with more on that. Peter's the head of collections and research at the Royal Air Force Museum. He's a distinguished military historian, one of our fantastic guests during the Platinum Jubilee coverage just a couple of months ago. Peter, then we were talking about Queen Elizabeth. Now we're talking about King Charles III. We are going to hear from him today. A national address, a televised address to the nation. What would you expect he would need to say right now as he in some ways introduces himself as king?
I mean, I think it's a huge challenge, and because so much of this is unprecedented, it's one of these things that we've expected for a long time, but it's really unprecedented because there's very little to compare it to. We recall the Queen's address when on her birthday when she became Queen as well, and obviously she found out the news when she was on safari in Kenya, and Prince Charles, King Charles III rather now, found out the news when he was actually there alongside her. So the speed of this is very different from when his mother ascended to the throne. And I think when it comes to the message, he's going to have to outline, I guess, what's going to happen next. It's going to be almost certainly a sincere expression of his grief and a sense of us needing to come together and move forward into this new era because, as you said earlier in your programme, this is the only monarch that many people in our country and across the Commonwealth have ever known. And so it's a brand new world for us that we're moving into, and there will certainly be some questions. It's still so early, they will come up as we go. And there's still several key details that need to be outlined as well, let alone the actual date of the funeral itself, which Buckingham Palace, I'm sure, will confirm in due course.
Peter, you used the word challenge, and I'd like to talk about that in a couple of different respects with you. Number one, the challenge for King Charles, the Queen beloved personally as a figure, but the monarchy itself, there are questions. Now, this will be a big debate for down the road, but since we're talking about King Charles, why don't we address it a little bit now? The future of the monarchy, the future of the Commonwealth, held together in many ways by the strength of the Queen as a unifying force. What are the challenges for the King in keeping it in the future as we look ahead?
Well, I mean, absolutely. His Royal Highness will be very conscious of this, that for many people, the monarchy was represented by the Queen. They were indivisible. It wasn't an institution, it was a person. Yet, of course, it is an institution, and there is always change. It is a finite role that one holds until one no longer holds it, and then it passes to the next generation. We're going through that now, and I think people are going to have to adjust to that and expect that, and it is going to raise some certain questions. People are going to reevaluate their relationship with this. There are some very practical issues. You know, where you are in Canada, the Constitution enables His Royal Highness to simply become head of state, and in the Constitution. In other parts of the Commonwealth, that's not true. The Commonwealth, the Constitution very much bounds Her Majesty the Queen as the head of state. So they're now currently without that. And that's going to take time to elaborate and change. And of course, this will raise questions. There were questions during, of course, most recently, if you look at Barbados and the recent referendum about becoming a republic, these are things that existed in the reign of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and they will continue and perhaps intensify now in the reign of His Majesty King Charles III. How that plays out, it's impossible to say. I still think that from everything we've seen of King Charles in his time as Prince of Wales, he is a very charismatic person. He's certainly humanised, I believe, himself a lot in the most recent. If you think about his address at the party at the palace as part of the Platinum Jubilee, he said, mummy, and these sorts of things. All of that has very much humanised that, and I think he very much took the lead from Her Majesty the Queen on how to humanise the institution and engage with people. And I think what we're going to find is this next stage of that, and we're going to see there will be challenges, there will be questions, and I think how those respond to, and how the royal family and how the Commonwealth respond to that is going to be quite fascinating. As a historian, it's fascinating for me. We are living through history,
yes.
And this is the type of thing that will be documented and studied in future. So I am both an analyst and a keen observer at the same time.
Thinking back, it brought a smile to my face. Yes, Mummy, from the stage at the Platinum Jubilee. He said the same thing 10 years prior. I was there for the Diamond Jubilee as well. Key thing that was different was, remember, Camilla was beside him on stage this time, and we have seen a warming toward him and toward now Queen Consort Camilla as we look to her role as well. A final thought on a different kind of challenge, and maybe we'll hear this in the address tonight, but he becomes king at a time of tremendous tumult in the country, economic crisis, the worst in a generation. A new government, taking over less than a week now. So just the times of the new king, I mean, what do you think that poses in terms of particular, challenge?
Well, I certainly think that it will be interesting because, of course, in his role as king, His Majesty can't take a direct or outspoken view on some of the political affairs that are taking place. We are living through very political, disruptive and polarised times here in the UK. So that will be quite interesting to see how that is managed. We will, of course, have to look ahead to the King's speech, the opening of Parliament, the King's address, and all these things that we're so used to seeing the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen do, will now pass to him. And so that in itself will have by its very novel nature, will have greater scrutiny and greater interest. But I think because of those additional challenges that we are facing here in the UK, it has heightened this sense of loss and understanding, because Her Majesty the Queen was our constant. She was the enduring factor that really stretched back across decades, and there was great comfort in that sense of solidity, this idea that really she would go on forever. But all things must pass, and we must always look to the future, and now that is what is happening. And actually, if you remember from the Jubilee celebrations, it was very, very clear that was being prepped, that the future was being prepped by Her Majesty even then. It wasn't just about Camilla being present as well alongside His Royal Highness, but also it was about that next generation too, them being on the balcony. These things have been planned, and it's been conscious, and they've been seeded in our minds. And now it's our challenge as a nation really to move forward and engage with that and progress.
And Princes George and Louis and Princess Charlotte as well, it was very clear, you're right, at the Platinum Jubilee celebration, an indication of what is in store in the future. Peter, thank you. So good to have you with us this morning as we look at what is before us and look live at Buckingham Palace. There are some new details to share with you. The British government, the government of Liz Truss, has just indicated there will be a period of national mourning for the Queen. It is now started, and it will continue until the end of the day of the state funeral. Now, we don't know when that is going to be taking place, but it is now underway, official national mourning until the end of the day of the state funeral. The royal mourning, that is for members of the family and the royal household, that will continue for a week after the funeral for Queen Elizabeth. We're also hearing details from the BBC on what is in store later today. The prayer service at St. Paul's, 6 p.m. local, so that will be 1 p.m. today. You'll see it here on CBC News Network. Prayer and reflection at St. Paul. So many royal occasions over the years, including a service of thanksgiving for her Platinum Jubilee celebration just back in June. There will be 2,000 seats allocated to the public, first come, first served basis today, and it will be broadcast, so we will will have images of that. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, they are expected to attend. And if the address from King Charles III takes place at that same time, if it happens to coincide, they expect they will play that inside the cathedral as well. So that is what we're starting to hear today as the day shapes up, what this will be as King Charles III and Camilla move from Balmoral to this scene in London as we look live at Buckingham Palace. She was the Queen on that throne for 70 years. She was our Queen for 70 years. 12 Canadian Prime Ministers served during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, and many have expressed condolences and shared personal memories of the Queen. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper released a statement saying this, in part, in my many personal memories with Her Majesty, she was always warm, knowledgeable, and engaging, and I shall remember those times with great affection. Paul Martin, former Prime Minister as well, of course, also reacting, saying her affection for Canada and Canada's affection for her was unmistakable. Queen Elizabeth was deeply inquisitive and keenly informed. She was exceptionally good company and very witty. And here is some more reaction from former prime ministers, beginning with the current prime minister and her 12th, Justin Trudeau.
In a complicated world, her steady grace and resolve brought comfort and strength to us all. Canada is in mourning. She was one of my favorite people in the world.
I met her in 1967. I met her dozens of times, and she was always very nice and gracious, and you know, and we spent good times together. We spent one time in the north, we were 4 or 5 days together, and traveling the same little plane from Eskimo village to another one. And, you know, we were three. Most of the time, Prince Philip was with the pilot in the front, and I was with the Queen and Air Marshal from the British Air Force. And the two of them were practicing their French with me for hours. So it was, she was a fantastic person.
I saw a lot of her, and both in London and at Commonwealth meetings and in Canada. And I thought that as a leader, she was an absolutely remarkable person who brought great wisdom and thoughtfulness and elegance to the manner in which she decided things and let us know when she was happy and when she wasn't. But she was, I thought she was terrific.
Brian Mulroney, and the issues, you know, the Queen was so well known for not delving into political matters, but on the matter of apartheid and on the matter of Nelson Mandela, they were very much aligned, and she spoke, made it very clear what her thoughts were on those two issues, really the two key departures for her in the political realm. Looking live at Ottawa and the Peace Tower, you can see the Canadian flag also at half-mast and will be until the day after her funeral. We would expect the current Prime Minister and the Governor-General, so Justin Trudeau and Mary Simon, to travel to the state funeral. John Northcott, we don't know exactly when that is going to take place, but one would expect 11 days within the next 2-week period, during which we're going to see these incredible scenes that we have not witnessed for decades, John, not just in the UK, but also in this country, because Canadians feeling very, very strongly and sharing their thoughts and gratitude at the passing of the Queen.
Yeah, we're going to see things, as you say, Heather, that are essentially from another era in terms of the pro forma activities that occur officially in this country. You talk about what hasn't been seen in decades. I remember my grandmother talking about the portrait of the Queen's father being draped in black, as it will be in terms of those official portraits that are in so many government offices across this country, and will remain draped in black until the day after the funeral, where they will then be replaced, and the printing and the framing of those portraits is happening right now of King Charles III. And there's an example of what we're seeing there. And officially, this is inscribed in federal documents. Those what would then be former portraits of the monarch can be then officially kept and designated as a souvenir of those 70 years that she reigned. We're seeing the federal government do a lot in terms of marking the passing. They have actually an online condolence book, and we're going to show you, I think, a picture that they have put up in terms of an official portrait as part of the commemoration that they have. And there it is there, an iconic image of her later in life. They have another image of her side by side with an image of herself when she was much younger. An online book of condolences, and we are hearing from Canadians from Edmonton, from Oakville, from Summerside, from Ancaster, from Chestermere, Alberta, but we're also hearing from people reacting, Canadians abroad, from Mexico, Hong Kong, Pakistan, in terms of those online condolences. In terms of what Canadians see in their everyday life, many of us will probably notice that the Queen is everywhere in a way that perhaps even yesterday at this time we didn't realize she was everywhere. On our money, of course, the $20 bill, and on our change, but also on everything from passports to government offices. All of those emblems, her royal emblem, will change over time, as will the printing and the portrait of her. But again, that will be a process. And of course, all of those denominations, the passports, all of these official documents that have her image and have her seal will, of course, remain valid, but will change over time, including oaths taken by, for example, MPs, members of the military. They have sworn allegiance to her as the monarch, but to her heirs and descendants. And so again, legally, that line, that through line continues. It's considered essentially part of common law in that it is meant to carry on through, even through the death of a monarch. Someone who's going to be very busy these days, pretty much around the clock in terms of the commemorations and the changes and the passage of that power is the Governor General. Of course, the Queen's representative and now the King's representative in this country, Mary Simon. Not in office all that long, but did get to meet Her Majesty, and here's what she had to say.
Following my appointment, Her Majesty said to me, "Be gentle with yourself." I've come to understand her words to mean that while we should work hard on the issues that matter, we should also take time to pause, to be patient, to lead with understanding and respect. I can see the wisdom in these words. To the entire royal family and to the Commonwealth in mourning, our thoughts are with you.
Very busy planning in terms of the military planning as well, the commemoration ceremony, the parade, all of which will take place in Ottawa, effectively on the same day, if not simultaneously, with what will be going on in the UK to mark Her Majesty's passing. Heather?
John, as we talked about the Queen over her reign as indefatigable. What is that? Well, obviously I didn't talk about it in that word, but tireless in her pursuits and in her work, and hundreds and thousands of official appearances, 600 charities, dozens of which were Canadian. You mentioned the changes to things like our currency and our passports. What about the Canadian charities that bear her name and ties?
Well, they are now in a position where they can apply, and again, all of this going through One Sussex and the Governor General's office, for another member of the royal family to be their official patron. 36 Canadian charities and agencies have that designation, as well as a number of other designations called royal. Again, in many cases, they may have to reapply as well. So there is a process underway, and it is up for agencies and organizations to make those decisions and to decide and to apply to see who then will be their patron moving forward. Heather?
Thank you, John. John, with The feeling in Canada this morning and the changes to come. Let's bring you some scenes from across the country. Charlottetown, for example. Premiers in Atlantic Canada and across the country have offered tributes to the Queen, and a Charlottetown landmark, one of many in the country with special ties. The Queen officially opened the Confederation Centre of the Arts on one of her many royal visits, 22 to the country all told. Back in 1964, she opened that. You can see the flags lowered. As they are in Nova Scotia, Brett Ruskin is in Halifax as we continue with our special coverage. Brett's moving locations, kind of a good background for us, Brett. Royal Canadian Navy tying in with what we're talking about as we, the tributes to the Queen from the East Coast. Tell us about that.
Heather, you know exactly what I'm about to talk about, don't you? So speaking of the flag, you mentioned the flag, first of all. There is a flag, just not sure if you can see it there, just in the distance. This is the Dartmouth waterfront there. It is at half-mast, and it doesn't look like it, but that is just a massive flag that you can see there at Alderney Landing. That's the ferry terminal where you can go back and forth across the harbour. And speaking across the harbour, if we take a look here, there's one of the ferries in the harbor there. But if we take a look here, this is Halifax waterfront now. And in this area, you can see some of the military ships. Some of, I think that's HMCS Fredericton, I believe. One of them, Fredericton's right there. But the HMCS, that acronym stands for, as of yesterday, it was Her Majesty's Canadian Ships. As of today, it's His Majesty's Canadian Ships. So the lettering won't change, but certainly what those letters mean has now changed. So that is just a taste of some of the response or some of the impact that the Queen's passing has had on Nova Scotians. Again, 5 visits that she had in 1951, 57, 1976, 1994, and then most recently in 2010. So lots of folks have real recent memories of the Queen's visits here to Nova Scotia. Here's one local business owner talking about the importance and the impact that this loss will now have.
I will grieve the loss of the Queen for many years to come. I will be comforted in knowing all the good that that woman has done for the world. She has shown to us what a mother figure is and how they can be and how strong they have to be in the most adverse and horrible conditions.
And so as for people who want to share their thoughts, share their grieving thoughts, their emotions, there's going to be a book of condolences available at Government House, the official residence of the Lieutenant Governor here in Nova Scotia. As well, people can lay flowers, wreaths, notes, gifts, things there at the flag, which will be at half-mast. Again, that's at Government House in downtown Halifax, just one of the many areas that we're likely to see, again, an outpouring of emotion from many people who are, you know, either waking up to or now responding to this first day following this news. Heather.
Brett, thank you. I really appreciate your joining in our coverage on air extra early this morning and bringing us the view from the east. Brett Ruskin is in Halifax. Bonnie Brownlee's with me this morning, our royal commentator. She too been with us since we've gone on the air at 3 o'clock Eastern. Bonnie, listening to Brett talking about those trips to Nova Scotia, 22 to the country, but 5 to Nova Scotia. And the last of those trips in 2010, she said something to the effect of, it's good to be home. Just remind us of the affinity she felt for our country, Bonnie.
Yeah, it was always quite interesting, and so I did a couple of royal trips with her when I worked in the Prime Minister's office, and she was always pleased to see any of us and to be around Canada, and quite curious about any Canadian that she met. She loved the East Coast, and Queen Victoria did too. I think it's come from a lifelong of stories from you know, Queen Victoria and others about their love for Canada as well, and in particular with the Indigenous communities of this country. So I think Canada, of all the countries in the Commonwealth, was steadfast and there for her throughout most of her reign. And so I think she felt a true affinity to this country as a partner in trying to bring stability and safety and security issues and economic issues to the Commonwealth countries and to the world in general. So a lot of it for her may have started out as politics, but came as a genuine love for this country.
And as we heard in some of the comments, there she is alongside former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, but they've all commented on how aware she was of the goings-on in this country. And to point out, we watched her work up until Tuesday of this week as she swore in Liz Truss, as her 15th Prime Minister. But not to be forgotten is the very last official statement we got from Queen Elizabeth before her passing was on the stabbing massacre in Saskatchewan, aware of what was going on, expressing her condolences to the people in that province and indeed to the people of Canada as she followed the events so closely. I'm wondering, people watching us extra early, when you mention your time in the PMO, just maybe explain your connection, how that was, and then your personal dealings with the Queen and your time with her, what you take away from those encounters, Bonnie.
Well, I worked in Prime Minister Mulroney's PMO for 8 years, so I was there for a long time, and through that process, I got to meet the members of the royal family. So that's how my entire relationship started with them. And the Queen and Prime Minister Mulroney got along quite well from the first meeting. And the interesting thing is he became Prime Minister in September of 1984. And within the first 3 months, we met the Queen, the Pope, and the President of the United States. So it was kind of this whirlwind.
Heady times.
Heady times. And the relationship with Her Majesty just developed, and also with the other young members. That's when I first met Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, as they were venturing out into their lives as well. And they were always so genuinely happy to have a conversation with any of us about life in general. Because they all did grow up in a bit of an ivory tower and lived in a fairly isolated environment. As glamorous as it all seems, there are restrictions to what they could do. So I was absolutely fascinated by all of them, and that they were interested in anything I had to say to them or talk to them about. So
it began, and here we are these many years later talking
Exactly.
about it, and you have such close ties and such particular insights, which I appreciate so much this morning. I want to come back to the point you made about Prince Charles, but mentioning the Queen and Brian Mulroney, and I was just talking a moment ago on issues of apartheid, on issues of Nelson Mandela. They had, they shared the same views, and she let it be known what those views were. He would have appreciated that.
Yes, I think people don't really truly understand the extent of a role that she played in apartheid. As you know, Prime Minister Mulroney was a real leader in that freedom, frankly, for Nelson Mandela, and they became true lifelong friends until Mandela died. But the Queen, in her very diplomatic way, very clever on lots of phone calls, sending little signals, being supportive here, being supportive there, but she had a view, and she wanted it to be carried out the way that it was. And you know, when you're a leader or a prime minister or president of the United States, to have the backing or just the conversations with somebody like Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth would be quite reassuring and exhilarating to have those conversations with her, knowing what she knows, and she knows everyone. She had access to every leader in the world. So it just made her such a formidable partner to have in any kind of situation. So I was, always quite impressed with her. And Prime Minister Mulroney is very generous on his thoughts and his relationship with the role that she played in his own success.
A towering figure on the world stage, as you quite rightly point out, Bonnie, and for that reason, what we are going to see at that state funeral is going to be beyond anything we have seen for decades and may ever have seen. Looking at some live pictures now outside Buckingham Palace, some of the military procession. We would expect to see all sorts of protocol and these types of ceremonies over the days to come, lots of rehearsals for what is going to come. And I'm not sure exactly where these cavalrymen are headed, but we will certainly be bringing you the scenes live as everything transpires there. And Bonnie, just before I let you go this time, I just want to ask, you mentioned again at that time in 1984, the anniversary of that not too long ago, the election in 1984, that huge majority government for Brian Mulroney, and meeting Prince Charles at that time. What was your perception of him then, and what have you seen in his evolution to now King Charles today?
Well, I think at one point we all thought he was this dashing prince, which he was as a young man. But I was quite impressed with his what he knew about Canada, what he knew about environmental issues even back then, and what he was trying to figure out his role should be. You know, because he had no idea how long he was going to be the Prince of Wales. And so he was really aware of that. And, you know, I'm always struck by people at a young age who seem to understand the shoes that they're in and what can they do to sort of build, I'm not saying a sideway life, but he built himself a life of purpose, especially with his charity work. So I was actually just really struck with his intelligence.
Bonnie, thank you. He has the Prince's Trust Canada, of course, very active here. We're going to be hearing from them, I would be sure, in the days to come. That's one of many of his charitable endeavors, but one that touches us. Bonnie Brownlee, I'll talk to you again in just a few minutes, if we could. I want to show you a scene. Well, let's go back to that again, the scene outside Buckingham Palace just moments ago. Police on horseback, mounted police, but also Peter Johnston joining me, military historian, and with the Royal Air Force Museum. And Peter, as we watch this is just as I said moments ago. Here we go. What are we looking at here, Peter? Do you have a monitor that you can tell me what is happening there?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So here we can see this is a troop of the lifeguards who are coming across, who are riding in front of Buckingham Palace gates there and probably around the Victoria Memorial. I imagine they're probably coming out of the park and going up to Wellington Barracks, where they'll be housed. Because what's going to begin now, of course, is this very important component of Operation London Bridge and the whole planning of the state funeral, which is the military involvement. And that's going to be in terms of supplying the Guard of Honour and the troops for lining the route for when Her Majesty's coffin is moved down from obviously to Westminster Abbey, but obviously comes down and lies in state as well in Westminster Hall at the Houses of Parliament. There'll be a large military procession for there. So what's kicked into gear now, obviously, is the rehearsals aspect of this. This is something that the military will have practiced before and drilled, but they'll be doing so again now to make sure that they look, that they get every fine detail down correctly. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing, exactly what they're doing. They've got to do at each point. Become familiar with all the words of command and that sort of thing as well. So that will begin to take place later in the night. You will see more units deployed on the streets. This actually will be quite an important thing because elements of the UK military are actually engaged in other operations. They are, for example, training Ukrainian soldiers at the minute in different parts of the UK. Elements of those troops will probably potentially have to be brought back to London to take part in this parade. So there's a lot of change going on here as well as this thing kicks up, let alone a change that will happen in terms of the household division, because there'll be the sovereign's escort, of course, as always has been. But you know, suddenly it's no longer the Queen's colours. It's the King. It's going to become the King's colours with the new monarch.
Couple of things just to add to that. Number one, we would expect to see, would we not, Peter, Canadian forces very much involved in the pageantry, the protocol to come as a Commonwealth country, when we see that for around the funeral. We do know, when you mention the movement of the Queen's body from Scotland to London, we do not know yet, it's not been confirmed whether it will be flown or on the royal train, so these are details that we await. And then we also, mentioning military, we're going to get a sense of that as the bells toll today, but also as gun salutes are offered in Hyde Park and at the Tower of London from a number of artillery groups. So there is already a flavor of the military participation. When you talk about the precision and the choreography of the British military, we talked about that last as we watched the Trooping the Colour back at the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And I'm just wondering if we could talk about that. You talked last time we spoke about the military being part of the fabric, or the Queen woven into the fabric of the British military. Prince Charles then took the royal salute for trooping the colour. Now he's King Charles. Talk about, if you could, his ties and his connections to the military.
I mean, I think he's very much carried on that tradition the monarchs have. You know, Her Majesty the Queen very much saw military service as being an integral part of that public service and public duties that came from being a monarch. She'd always been surrounded by people in uniform. Obviously, you know, Prince Philip had served with great distinction in the Second World War in the Royal Navy. King Charles followed his father and also served in the Royal Navy as well. We know other members of the royal family, most notably Prince Harry served in Afghanistan and did 2 tours there. The Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, is a qualified RAF pilot, and he's also served in air-sea rescue operations too. So this is very much bound up in what they as a family represent. You know, just like many other families in the UK, the family business, if you will, is also serving in the military, and that dynastic tradition of following parents into uniform is something that many people equate to. Now, King Charles himself has held ceremonial roles. He's the Colonel-in-Chief of several regiments, most notably the Welsh Guards, whose uniform he wears. He wore here trooping the colour and other state occasions, but also the Parachute Regiment as well. But he will also have to inherit new titles now that Her Majesty the Queen has passed. The roles that she had as Colonel-in-Chief of various regiments too will become vacant and need to be filled. And there's a whole lot of royal protocol that goes this. What won't change is the royal connection with the British Armed Forces. That is going to continue and remain because it is such an integral factor and a part of that. Of life in uniform, and it's something that those in uniform always recognise and are greatly appreciative of. If you ever speak to them about when any of the royals have made a visit to them, they always comment on how engaged they are, how important they are. They've always been there at some of the key moments of a regiment's life, either the presentation of new colours, for example, or the medal parades. Most recently, you know, some of the royals have participated in handing out medals for the Jubilee to serve the members of the armed forces, and they performed in the pageantry for the various occasions, the state occasions, the celebration of the monarchy too. That will continue. It existed before Her Majesty the Queen. It will continue now into the reign of King Charles III, and will also be bound up in the future as well. And so this is just the next chapter in that. But there's a huge amount of work that will have to go into doing this, as well as preparing for changing things like the cap badges, the change of the royal ciphers. Various units might have to change their names. They might be kept. That will be a royal prerogative to do that. I'm thinking of something like the Queen's Own Royal Lancers. His Majesty the King might decide to leave that as a memorial to his mother and enduring memory. That will be entirely his prerogative. At the minute, it's very early stages, but these are the types of things the very practical things that need to come out and will affect the armed forces here in the UK.
Peter, thank you very much. And just stay with me if you would. We'll be back for more of your thoughts this morning. Military historian Peter Johnston, who's in London. I want to show you some pictures that we're just getting in. I remember the scene from 2005. The Queen at Prince Harry's graduation from the Sandhurst Military Academy, that distinguished military academy. Because, as Peter points out, distinguished military career for Prince Harry. These are pictures of Prince Harry at Aberdeen Airport. He had travelled to Balmoral. He was with his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, in England for their own charitable events. She did not travel with him, but he returned to Balmoral, or travelled to Balmoral, to be with the members of the immediate family. There are scenes from just moments ago as he boarded that private jet and leaves Scotland right now. We are receiving from you today, as we asked, and we are so appreciative of the photos and the stories and the memories. And John is back. You've been going through some of those, John. Tell me some that you're hearing.
Well, Heather, you know I enjoy speaking to Canadians out and about, and this is the sense we're getting this morning in terms of the memories that Canadians are sending in to us, and they are just a flood coming over the transom in terms of the stories that we're going to talk about. And we're going to show you some pictures. Now, these are pictures put up by the Government of Canada of various visits by the Queen to Canada over the years. So they won't be, and there's a shot now, for example. This is actually coming in from a viewer. This is coming in from Marilyn Hayden Ayres. That is her father there with Her Majesty on a visit to Canada. Carol Sardoni has sent in a picture here, 1959, from Brantford. And there are a series of portraits there with Prince Philip as well. John Blatherworth coming from New Westminster, a visit there in 1983. And that is the Mayor, Tom Baker, with Her Majesty there. And we're also hearing, and if we have those pictures from the Canadian government that they have been posting as well, and Canadians sharing their stories with us. I'm thinking perhaps of one visit coming to this Canada. This is Sandy McCall. This is from Manitoba. This is from the early 60s. Her aunt had to work. The Queen was getting off a train and getting into a motorcade. And so Sandy McCall then went and took pictures so that she could share them with her aunt. Walking backwards as she did, fell into a mud puddle, literally. Her Majesty would have looked a little surprised. A lady in waiting came over and she was okay. And Sandy making the comment, she was glad there wasn't any media then. At that era, of course, the omnipresence of the media and the omniscience of the media wasn't everywhere. So that photograph was not ever preserved. Annette Gray talked about visiting and seeing the Queen twice. Once at Buckingham Palace, a 10-year-old in the family. She saw the Queen looking over, kind of looking alarmed. A 10-year-old in the family was climbing up Buckingham Palace gates as well. Confederation Centre Choir, this coming from Anne McLean of Halifax. She sang to the Queen in a choir there and then had a reception backstage with Prince Philip sharing pink champagne. And finally, Andrew Scott sharing the story of the great-grandmother getting a letter from the Queen on her 100th birthday and recalling the joy that she had in receiving that letter. Hundreds, thousands of Canadians sharing their memories of Her Majesty with us this morning. Heather.
You know we love this, John, so please bring them to us as we continue with our extended coverage this morning. Thank you, John. If you have photos to share, stories to share, in fact, you had to meet somebody this morning who also had a fall in front of the Queen, we'd love to hear all about it. Here's how you reach us. ask@CBC.ca. To give you another perspective, Windsor Castle, which had been the home for Queen Elizabeth, certainly very rarely left Windsor during the pandemic, of course, passing away in Scotland at Balmoral. But these are live pictures from Windsor, and you can see the people gathering as they have at all of the royal residences. Flowers, interestingly, at Windsor, people being asked to leave them specifically at the gate at the Long Walk, the famous Long Walk. And then they're going to bring them inside the castle every night and place them on the castle grass, the grass inside, which is right near St. George's Chapel. We've seen that so closely, famous for weddings, but also for funerals. And that is where we will get in St. George's Chapel the interment service, the special committal service, and she will be laid to rest finally in a special memorial chapel just near the main chapel at Windsor. Our continuous coverage following the death of Queen Elizabeth resumes in just one moment here on CBC News Network. In the UK, around the world, here in Canada, Queen Elizabeth's death is being marked with ritual and ceremony that have been decades in the planning. The carefully choreographed set of events begins this morning. Good morning. I'm Heather Hiscox. Welcome to our special coverage on CBC News Network, CBC Television, and live streaming on CBCNews.ca. On this morning, after the news, it is bringing an outpouring of tributes to Queen Elizabeth II, ushering in a new era for a new monarch. God save the King. That moment from Buckingham Palace last night as thousands gathered despite the rain to sing in tribute, the screens from their phones illuminating those famous gates.
The Queen means everything to me like my mum means to me. She was a fantastic lady. She'll always be a fantastic lady. She'll always be a part of my life forever.
It feels very strange to have this person that's been the head of everything in my life go.
Our two countries have been so close over so many centuries, and we've had a tough past, but it goes without saying that she was an iconic woman and a role model for women of all ages and all colours and beliefs.
The Queen has done so much for us for the past 70 years, and I think that it's our kind of duty as the British people and just generally to show our respect to someone who served us for 70 years.
The thoughts of the mourners who gathered last night. We are seeing huge throngs this morning, and we will keep an eye on those live pictures. But these are live pictures coming from the airport in Aberdeen, Scotland. We just lost them, but we're watching for King Charles III to leave from there. He is at Balmoral. He has spent the night at Balmoral, and he has going to be traveling to Aberdeen. Now, these are pictures from just a little bit earlier this morning. Prince Harry, who also joined the immediate members of the royal family, the senior royals, at the bedside at the final moments of the life of Queen Elizabeth. He has left Balmoral this morning, and these are scenes of him as he boards a jet to leave. He had flown in from England. He was there with his wife, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, for charitable events, now leaving the country. Meghan did not travel with him yesterday. We were bringing you all of the coverage, and let's begin with Dominic Volitis, who's in London. The latest that we are hearing about now, an official national mourning period.
A very different feeling today. It is a very somber day, a very sad day. A state of mourning has now officially begun here in the UK, and part of that is a period of royal mourning. And a short while ago, Heather, we received more details from Buckingham Palace on what that will look like, how that will play out. We have been told that it is King Charles's wish that the period of royal mourning will last from today until 7 days after the Queen's funeral, the date of which will be confirmed in due course. It will be observed, Heather, by members of the royal family, royal household staff and representatives of the royal household on official duties, together with troops which are committed to ceremonial duties. Now, later today, Heather, King Charles and his Queen Consort will return to London from Balmoral. One of the first things the King will do when he gets here is hold his first audience with Britain's Prime Minister Liz Truss. He's also expected to meet the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, who is in charge of the Queen's funeral arrangements. And we understand that King Charles will sign off on those arrangements today. And then this evening, Heather, we are expecting King Charles to address the nation in a televised speech, during which he will pay tribute to his late mother and pledge to serve as head of state. Meanwhile, the House of Commons will convene today for a special session. It will start at noon, so in a couple of hours from now, instead of 9:30 as was originally planned. It will be led by the British Prime Minister Liz Truss and is expected to last until 10 p.m. tonight. And during the 10-hour session, MPs and peers will be invited to pay tribute to the Queen. The Prime Minister and senior government ministers will also attend a remembrance service at St Paul's Cathedral later today, after which we are expecting the government to confirm the length of national mourning, which, as I say, officially started today, and we think that will last around 12 days. One final point, Heather, the Queen's passing will also be marked today in central London with a royal gun salute at 1 p.m. local time, so 8 a.m. Eastern. 96 rounds, one for every year of the Queen's life, will be fired in tribute in Hyde Park and at the Tower of London. Churches here in the capital and across the country will also be marking the death of the Queen today. The bells at Westminster Abbey, St Paul's Cathedral and Windsor Castle will all toll in a coordinated tribute to the Queen. Churches across the land will be doing the same, with many being encouraged to open their doors for prayer and special services. So a busy day ahead, and of course a particularly sombre one too, Heather.
Dominic Velitis from London. Thank you very much, Dominic. As we look at live pictures, Dom just mentioned somber mood. I want to bring in Bonnie Brownlee, who's a royal commentator who is with us this morning. Bonnie, I thank you, because what people may not realize if they're tuning in, this is normally when we go on the air, but you and I have been together since 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern for extended coverage today, and I really appreciate it. Beginning with these live pictures, this is outside the main gate at Balmoral, where the Queen passed away yesterday. But as you look at these scenes, Bonnie, you can see people embracing, looking at the flowers, obviously distraught, very emotional at the passing of the Queen. What are your thoughts as you look at this, and how do you think it speaks to this moment for the people there?
Well, there'd be a lot of shock for people. You know, I think people knew the Queen was not well, but probably didn't realize how ill she was. So for them, it's a moment to just go pay tribute to her, respect her, maybe themselves, try to help the healing process or begin it. I think it's just a way for people to be together with other, you know, people from their own country or expats or whoever, you know, is walking around London these days that would want to go there and spend a little time saying thank you to a woman who had a lot to do with the nation and the civil society that they live in today.
That's such a good point, because for so many, we've heard people say they're shocked at her passing, despite her advanced age of 96. The suddenness of it, because there was always this permanence to Queen Elizabeth, and everyone hoped there would be permanence, that she would always be there personally. But the fact of her death, this is a time, this is, I said, watershed moment. What is about to change in your view, or what has now begun to change?
Well, you know, how will King Charles III be accepted? How will the people of Great Britain in particular feel about him coming in as the new sovereign? Will they be acceptable to it? And, you know, it's always hard to say at this point, because there is so much that's unknown, but perhaps in a week people will start to look again to the sovereign for you know, their own sort of national well-being and their safety in their homes that they live in at night. So I have to think that over the course of the next week or two, as we are in a state of mourning, that we will soon people will start to understand that the change is here and that they have a new king, and we will see if this is going to work. Again, it is all so new. And people knew it was coming, but for some reason they seem to have been resistant to it.
Such a degree of affection and respect for her, and you're seeing that these are just scenes outside Balmoral. We're seeing similar scenes at Windsor and at Buckingham Palace and elsewhere through, indeed, the Commonwealth as well. Bonnie, when you mentioned people didn't realize how ill she was, we looked at the pictures of her appointing formally Liz Truss this week, and a lot of discussion about indications of her heart health, for example, that bruise on her hand. Your sources within the family and within the palace, what are they telling you about the Queen's health? And also, what are they telling you in the past 12 hours, 15 hours now about the family's response and the family's being there?
I can tell you that the family is trying to manage the grief of losing their mother in such a public way. even though they've all been used to public life since they were born, it is still the loss of their mother and a grandmother and a great-granny. And so they have to share it with everyone. So it's, you know, you can only imagine going through grief yourself when you lose a parent. So I know that they are struggling with the sharing of her at this time. They were not, I think they thought they had a little bit more time, but sometimes, as you well know, when death is, if pneumonia, if things hit you, if you're suffering from any kind of heart issue, whatever the case is, it can come quick. And I think it was a bit of a surprise for all of them.
Bonnie, thank you. Please stay with me, if you will, for a few more hours. Much more to talk about with you. Thank you, Bonnie Brownlee, for now. One of the things that we know, as Dominic was mentioning, is there's going to be one of many church services that we'll see leading up to the state funeral in Westminster Abbey, but it is St. Paul's today for a service of prayer and reflection later on today. A message from the head of the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He indicated yesterday, if you remember, at this time we were talking about his offering of prayers for the Queen, and that was an indication of perhaps the gravity of the situation. But the Queen held the titular role as head of the church. He was the spiritual leader, and this morning Archbishop Justin Welby is honoring the Queen for her 7 decades of service and spoke of her as an inspiration.
The Queen constantly showed us the meaning of life. She was joyful, she was humorous, life was full. Even in the Annus Horribilis, as she so perfectly summed up the most difficult year possibly of her reign. Her life was full, but she never, even in bad moments, lost hope. I obviously spoke to her after the death of the Duke of Edinburgh and spent some time with her. And there was just a solidity of hope in her life. That's the second word. Abundance and hope.
Justin Welby, who had COVID at the time of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, was not able to take part in the service of Thanksgiving at that time, but we would anticipate hearing from him often in the days to come, leading up to the service for the Queen in Westminster Abbey. Today, one of our focal points is Edinburgh. There are live pictures of Balmoral, of course, the Queen's body still there. It is there that she passed away yesterday at the age of 96. Eventually, her body will be transported to the location where Abby Kugathasan is, and that is the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. That is the official residence of the monarchy in Scotland. Abby is there for the scene and to speak to people. Abby, good morning. What are they telling you today?
Good morning, Heather. Shock and sadness here in Scotland. There's some noise behind me. There's some activity happening as there's barricades being put up because there are crowds starting to gather here. They're placing flowers, they're placing notes. They're, standing around speaking to each other, strangers who've never met each other before, talking about their memories of the Queen. And there are many memories over the 7 decades that she sat on the throne. I'm going to read you a couple of the notes that I saw as I was over there just a short while ago. One says, "Thank you for your lifelong service." Another reads, "Thank you for your faithful duty to our country and especially to Hong Kong." Someone who came perhaps on a vacation or a visit and felt the need to leave flowers and a note to the Queen there. There's also another note, very short. It says simply, "Thank you, Your Majesty." 4 words that convey the gratitude, the depth of gratitude that many people here in Scotland feel to the Queen. And, we were speaking to some women earlier as well. They're originally from Australia. They live here in Scotland now. They live and work in Scotland, and they are in shock as well. They say she's the only monarch they have ever known, the only monarch their parents have ever known, and it's simply unbelievable that she's no longer with us. So a lot of shock and grief again, a lot of messages being shared here at the Palace of Holyrood House, which is, as you mentioned, the official residence of the monarch.
Abby, as you are there, having traveled to London to Scotland, going to be bringing us the view from there, just talk about the ties between the Queen and Scotland. We know how much she loved her summers in Balmoral, how important the Highlands were to her. So the affinity for the Queen with Scotland and with Balmoral especially, her favorite place to be.
Her favorite place to be since childhood. She spent much of time here with her parents and her sister, Princess Margaret. That, of course, as a young girl, she was often in Scotland over the summers. And as a married woman, a newly married woman, she took a tour with Prince Philip of the country as well, and then headed to Balmoral for a portion of her honeymoon. As a grandmother, she was there with Prince William and with Prince Harry, as well as her 4 children. So a lot of time was spent at Balmoral over various summers. Usually she spends about 3 months annually up in the Highlands, and as you mentioned, one of her favorite places. Prince William has previously said in an interview that growing up, he knew just how much she relished her time on the estate, the private residence of the Windsors, and that she was able to get away from the very public life in London, a very public life at Buckingham Palace, and perhaps at Windsor Castle as well, that when she was here, she was among others, and that she could sort of be herself. She could go for long walks with her dogs. There were picnics and barbecues. There are stories that Prince Philip was the one behind the grill as his young children ran around him. So plenty of wonderful memories at Balmoral Castle. And we heard from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, saying that she hopes that the family found some comfort in the fact that Her Majesty spent her final days at a place that she loved so dearly.
Abby, thank you very much. I'm so pleased to have you there in Edinburgh for all of this for us. Abby Kugathasan at the Palace of Holyrood House today. Keeping our watch on that as we also watch what is happening. Well, those are live pictures of Balmoral, the main entrance there to the Queen's estate in Scotland, the palace. I want to show you what's the scene in the Peace Tower. That's on the right of your screen there. Live pictures as the flag in Canada is at half-mast and will be until the day after the Queen's funeral. And we are talking about how the Queen's death is affecting Canadians. Many Canadian politicians and leaders have spoken out and shared their condolences. The Prime Minister, the current, the 12th to serve under Queen Elizabeth, Justin Trudeau, who's known the Queen since he was a child and his father was Prime Minister, he shared his emotional tribute of the Queen on the Queen's passing when he spoke in Vancouver yesterday.
As her 12th Canadian Prime Minister, I'm having trouble believing that my last sit-down with her was my last. I will so miss those chats. She was thoughtful, wise, curious, helpful, funny, and so much more. Canada is in mourning. She was one of my favorite people in the world, and I will miss her so.
Clearly emotional, the Prime Minister yesterday as he paid tribute, and we would expect the Prime Minister, the Governor General to be there in attendance for the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth. We don't have the date for that confirmed so far today. We know that our next guest will be part of many things, too, as we look at the Peace Tower and the flag at half-mast. Ralph Goodale is with me this morning, High Commissioner for Canada in the UK. High Commissioner, I'm so glad to have your perspective this morning. Good morning, and thank you for being back on our program today.
Good morning, Heather. It's an honor to be here, but so sad that it's about this topic.
Well, it is, because you and I had 2 wonderful conversations just a couple of months ago at the occasion of the Platinum Jubilee for Queen Elizabeth, 70 years on the throne. And we talked of many things at that time, which I'm going to come back to, I think. But what I'd love, if we could begin this morning, you were on with Vashi, we were talking about your thoughts on the passing of the Queen. I want to bring in some live pictures. We'll get to this in a slightly different way. As you look at the pictures from Balmoral and from Buckingham Palace and outside Windsor, just thousands of people in this growing mountain of flowers and mementos and tributes, High Commissioner. What do you think that captures about the sentiment right now and maybe reflects your own right at this point?
I think it indicates how strongly people feel about the late Queen. She was the only monarch that most of us have ever known. She was with us as a steady, constant, solid figure, a part of our lives, a part of our government for 7 decades. And even when you anticipate that the end might be near, when it actually happens, it's a hard thing to come to terms to. And I think people are demonstrating their affection for the Queen and their genuine love and their gratitude for the way in which she conducted herself, and thereby represented the United Kingdom and Canada, the Queen of both countries, in such an amazing, dignified, respectful manner for such a long time.
You hear from many people there, they felt that she was such a, her permanence, that she would always be there. You're right, the reflection of the shock at her loss. And thank you, ma'am, seems to be a sentiment, as you suggested, which we're hearing from many people in those lineups. You have a particular role to play in things that are going to be coming up in the next days. Because she passed away in Balmoral, as I've been explaining through the morning, High Commissioner, it changes the timeline somewhat. What was to have happened today is the Accession Council, which is the official proclamation of Charles as King Charles III. As High Commissioner, you are on that council. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, what you will be doing, and what you're understanding as far as the schedule of that now?
Well, the precedents here are few and far between, as you can imagine. But one step in the process following the death of a monarch is for a council of representatives of the realm, the United Kingdom, but also the other countries in which Her Majesty has been the Queen, including Canada, a council of officials from all of those realms gather, and they formalize the appointment of the new king and issue a proclamation to that effect. From a legal point of view, King Charles became king the moment his mother passed away. But there is this routine process that now needs to unfold. And as the official representative of Canada in the United Kingdom, it is a high honor to participate on behalf of our country in that process of the Accession Council meeting and then issuing the proclamation that starts the reign of King Charles III.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I was going to ask you that. I mean, what a time. I'm looking back as you speak at the archives. I'm not sure who was actually the High Commissioner, whether it was, let me see, it would have been Dana Wilgress or Norman Robertson. Maybe you know this, but we have to go back into the archives to 1952 that time. For a Canadian High Commissioner to the UK, it would have been part of this when the Queen became the Queen. What an incredible moment for you to have an experience that so few have had.
Well, it's a remarkable moment in history. An era has come to an end, and a new one is beginning. And this will be a period of transition for all of us, getting used to saying the King after we've said the Queen for the last almost 71 years. It's a big change, and it's one that I think will take a little bit of time for people to get used to. And the person who obviously has to make the largest adjustment is King Charles himself. He has played the role of the heir apparent for, I think, the longest time in the history of the British monarchy. And now he becomes the monarch himself. That is a different role from being the heir apparent. And the adjustments required for King Charles will be the most enormous for all of us.
Yes.
But he's had a lot of time to prepare. So
More
I'm
than
sure
anyone
he is
else,
ready for this.
the longest preparatory period to assume this role as King Charles III. Indicating his challenges and what is ahead of him, we're going to get the first indication tonight in that televised address, or for our time, it'll be earlier today. I'm wondering, as someone who knows what it's like to make speeches in important times, what do you think would be important for the new king to say in his first address?
Well, far be it from me to offer any royal advice, but I would think he would want to be very personal. This is his first opportunity to speak to all of the people for whom he is now monarch. He will speak to officials and parliamentarians and so forth, but the television address tonight, he speaks to everyone. And no doubt he will be grieving for his mother, and I'm sure that will be evident. But in addition to that, he will want to offer the reassurance of solidarity and stability rolling forward, and maybe he'll lay out some of his own ambitions for the role. He has a remarkable role model to follow. An absolutely unique one in the history of the monarchy, and I'm sure he understands the size of those shoes.
You know, I'm wondering, we're going to be following a lot of what you're doing in the next little while, with Canada playing a leading role, not just at the Session Council tomorrow, but over the days to come, and I'm sure at the state funeral.
Yes.
So I'm hoping we have many more opportunities to speak, High Commissioner. But when you talk about the Queen and the standard she set for her son to take over, probably in the hours since her passing, you've been reflecting, again, back to the Platinum Jubilee. You shared some wonderful stories with me about your many encounters with the Queen, not just there, but of course over your years in politics here in Canada. In these last 12 hours, what really has been sticking with you? Is there an anecdote or an encounter or something she said to you that's really, really top of mind for you?
The first audience that a High Commissioner has with Her Majesty is a pretty special moment. It happened virtually because it was in the midst of COVID. She was at Windsor Castle. I was at Buckingham Palace. What struck me from that conversation, apart from how up to speed and involved she was on the G7 and COP26 and geopolitics and what Russia was doing and so forth, she absolutely au courant on all of that. But in addition to that, her use of the media, the video, using it in such a way that you had the feeling that she was right in the room with you. At that time, 96 years old or 95 years old. What an amazing ability to move with the times and be engaged in the most modern technology. I also had a wonderful chat with her on her 90th birthday when I was Minister of Public Safety, and Bob Paulson, the Commissioner of the RCMP, was with me at that time. And we presented her with a horse, which she just loves, of course. She presented Paulson, Commissioner Paulson, with a hobby horse as a toy from the Royal Toy Maker, a huge, it was 6 feet long and 4 feet tall. And she invited Bob Paulson to ride the hobby horse, which all the cameras were clicking and a look of terror on Bob Paulson's face as he sort of whispered to me, "What should I do now, Minister?" And I pointed out, she's the honorary commissioner of the RCMP. Get on the horse, Bob.
Giddy up, Commissioner. I love that. You told that to me in June. It's well worth repeating today, remembering the many moments, the human encounters as we share those. Thank you so much, High Commissioner. I would expect we'll see the RCMP in the days to come, and Canadian military as well, and we will have many more conversations, certainly tomorrow for that very important moment with the Session Council. Thank you, sir.
All the very best.
I appreciate that. We're going to have special coverage of the accession of King Charles III tomorrow here on this network, so we hope you'll join us for that. We'll bring you details on exact times coming up. But as we look here at Balmoral. This is outside. This is a first perspective from this angle of the flowers that are now in place. Shades of Princess Diana, isn't it? As it begins. But again, this is just Balmoral. What I can tell you is the breaking news that the BBC is now confirming King Charles III has left Balmoral Castle and is expected to return to London with Camilla, Queen Consort Camilla. He will meet the Prime Minister. That his first order of business when he returns to London. We have not seen scenes of a motorcade, but as Bonnie Brownlee was telling us, there are many entrances in and out of that estate. This is the main entrance. So we know that there is a plane at Aberdeen Airport, and we would expect it is that plane that will fly him to London, and we'll bring you coverage of all of that. But more and more people arriving there at the gates of Balmoral, as they are at Sandringham and at Windsor and at Buckingham Palace, to pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth after 70 years as Queen. Canada's Queen, too. And John Northcott is here. John's looking at some of the messages of condolence, and I really appreciate your sharing these with us, John, this morning.
Yeah, indeed, Heather. This is what we're seeing in part because there are so many available portals to condolence books, including set out by the federal government. Online they have, including portraits, I should say, of Her Majesty that tell the story. They're more established picture of Her Majesty, a more current one, and if we have it, we may have the one, there it is there, side by side, from the beginning of her reign to the end there shown. And this is part of what we're seeing in terms of the condolences being offered by Canadians to the world, really, in terms of their reactions, and Canadians from right across this country and from right around the world to be able to share how they feel in terms of, and the comments very simple, heaviest heart, deepest condolences, and the address here to King Charles III and the royal family. 15 years ago, I swore to Her Majesty the Queen. Today, I mourn along with the Commonwealth. My condolences to the royal family. And again, this is coming from Chestermere, Alberta, Ancaster, Ontario, Oakville, San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, Pakistan, Hong Kong. Again, very simple messages. Here's one from Billy from Vancouver, but he's in Hong Kong. Thank you, Your Majesty, the grandma of the world. We will miss you. May our Queen rest in eternal peace, and God bless her descendants. From Barbara from Summerside, PEI. So from across the country and around the world. And this is Canadians are going to see, in some cases, subtle changes, in some cases, more significant changes to their everyday life. Everything from official portraits that will be draped in black. And of course, at the end of the mourning period, assuming there are new available official portraits of King Charles III, they will be framed and they'll be put up in government offices across this country. I mentioned books of condolences will be open in legislatures across the country, in addition to what is online. Our currency, of course, the $20 bill and the change, all bearing a portrait of Her Majesty. They will, of course, remain coin of the realm. Think of it in terms of the language being used around that valid tender in this country until new ones are printed and minted with the image of Charles III. Allegiances sworn. One of the condolences mentioned that, whether it is for citizenship, whether it is to be an MP, whether it is to be to the member of a military, you swear allegiance to the Queen and to her descendants and successors. So again, that will carry on as a through line. So much of what goes on in terms of the royal imprimatur and that flow of power in this country, of course, comes from the Governor General, Mary Simon, looking back on her remembrances around her meeting, quite recent, of course, with the Queen. Have a listen.
Following my appointment, Her Majesty said to me, "Be gentle with yourself." I've come to understand her words to mean that while we should work hard on the issues that matter, we should also take time to pause, to be patient, to lead with understanding and respect. I can see the wisdom in these words. To the entire royal family and to the Commonwealth in mourning, our thoughts are with you.
The Governor General and her office will be very busy in the coming days. So many organizations, charities that the Queen was a patron of in terms of, again, that flow of power, those designations. And of course, the commemoration, the church service is going to take place in Ottawa. Fly past, 96 guns in salute. All of this as this subtle, gradual, eventual passage of power continues through on so many levels, both visible and invisible. Heather?
John, thank you very much. Okay. Really appreciate those messages. John will continue to bring them to us through our continuing coverage following the death of Queen Elizabeth. You often heard her say on her many visits to Canada, the 22, in fact, she said this in her last visit in 2010, it's good to be home. This country she considered a second home, and people in Canada always happy to welcome her home. This is what people in Calgary are saying about the Queen now.
You know, I felt really sad. I just felt really profound sadness. You know, it's just the end of an icon.
The Queen was, I don't know, she was like a mother figure in a way, you know. She took care of the country. She was like, she visited the Commonwealth.
To me personally, you know, she's always been there. And it's really sad. She's, you know, it's going to be hard to imagine what it'll be like without her.
Very sad. She'll be badly missed.
She will be. And what about her service?
Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Best I've ever known.
Service, stability, constancy, dedication, duty, all of the words that we're hearing around the world, really, as people pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth. Passing away at 96, the longest reigning monarch in British history, and Canada's Queen, of course, as well. Bringing you the national perspective, 3 visits to Newfoundland and Labrador. And let's take you there now to Chris O'Neill-Yates, who is part of our team, bringing us the Newfoundland story. Government House, that's the backdrop there. Chris, tell us about what is happening there and to whom you have been speaking.
Well, Heather, as you can imagine, as has been the case throughout the world, here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the outpouring started immediately yesterday when it became known that the Queen's health was deteriorating, and later when she passed. And I spoke to a lot of people yesterday. There's a very special connection here in this province. While everybody doesn't agree or follow the monarchy, a lot of people respect the Queen. Yesterday, one of the first people to speak to us was here at Government House. Judy Foote, the Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, spoke very shortly after her death and expressed her feelings about the passing of the Queen. Here's a little of what she had to say.
So I know she will be missed by many, and she will be missed by many in Newfoundland and Labrador. And when we met at Buckingham Palace, she recounted on one of her visits seeing the iceberg during that visit that dwarfed the Narrows of St. John's. She had a wonderful sense of humor, and when you were in conversation with her, you could tell that she hung on every word, that she really was engaging and enjoyed the conversation.
And that is Newfoundland and Labrador Lieutenant Governor Judy Foote yesterday expressing how she felt in her experiences having met with Queen Elizabeth II.
That is an official reaction. But what are Newfoundlanders saying to you too, Chris?
I took to the streets here yesterday in downtown St. John's shortly after the news broke. And Heather, just the fact that the Queen had passed on, even though it was not entirely unexpected, came as a shock to people. And everybody had memories to share. One of the people who did have a memory to share is a woman who was here when I covered the royal visit of Charles and Camilla, now King Charles III, back in June. She has a very special portrait of a young Queen Elizabeth hanging in her home here at Kitty Vitty Village, which is part of St. John's. Here's Linda Henneberry talking a little bit about her love and her admiration for Queen Elizabeth II.
I painted a picture quite about her, so I asked him if he'd like to have it, and he said he would accept it. And he said how nice it was for me to give it to him. And then he looked at the picture, because I had the picture of the Queen down by my legs. And he said, it's quite lovely. She was quite young then. So during the conversation the second time, I wished him good luck, and I said to him, don't you forget she's your mother. And I said, you love her to pieces, and don't you forget that. And he reached over and grabbed my hand again and squeezed my hand. You could see the print of his fingers in the palm of my hand. And he said, and good luck to you too.
Such a beautiful memory from a recent visit by now King Charles III. And of course, Linda Henneberry says the thing she'll miss most about the Queen, that one thing that has remained the same as she has aged, is that smile. But Heather, she'll be able to enjoy that smile of a young Queen Elizabeth II on the portrait that will continue to hang on her wall in her home here in St. John's.
Just beautiful stories. Chris, thank you so much. Chris O'Neill Yates, who's outside Government House in St. John's. As we look live here at the scene, one of the gates at Balmoral, you see the crowd there gathering, not from this perspective, you can't see, but the flowers, the pile of flowers placed really reverentially, many moments of emotion, quiet reflection as people pause to express gratitude and thoughts and thanks to the Queen, who passed away yesterday at the age of 96. Now, what we can tell you is that we have confirmation that King Charles III and Queen Consort Camilla have left Balmoral, heading to Aberdeen Airport, and they will then fly to London. The timeline has changed a little bit in that the Queen died in Scotland, and that has shifted events somewhat. Ralph Goodale, the High Commissioner we were just speaking to, the Accession Council was to have been in session today. That's been moved to tomorrow, but we do know that the new king will meet with the Prime Minister. We do know there has been some guidance as to national mourning periods and royal mourning periods. We do anticipate in about a 20 minutes time bells and gun salute. So this is part of the protocol for this first day. And then later today, a televised address from King Charles III to the nation, and a service at St. Paul's Cathedral at 6 p.m. local, so that's 1 p.m. for us Eastern Time, which will be broadcast, and we hope to be able to show that to you as well. Prime Minister Liz Truss, the Mayor of London, in attendance, along with some 2,000 people, public, her former subjects, now the King's subjects, going to be on a first-come, first-served basis. That is what is ahead for us today, and as we look at those live pictures, I want to welcome in John Fraser, who is a founding fellow of the Institute for the Study of the Crown in Canada. John, of all the people I wanted to speak to today, I think your voice was definitely right at the top of the list, because as you look at these scenes of people, I'm wondering what your thoughts are, the moment of the passing of Queen Elizabeth, the import of it as you see it.
I think the same as everyone. Sadness. Anticipation of a new reign and hopes for it, immense gratitude for an extraordinary life of service. I think for those who have loved this Queen, that's normal.
We're certainly hearing similar sentiments. You were listening, I'm sure, to Chris O'Neill Yates as she was reporting and bringing us the view from Newfoundland and from St. John's, and the woman to whom she was speaking saying she'll miss the smile of Queen Elizabeth most. What about you personally? What will you miss now that she's incredibly no longer going to be part of our daily life?
Well, I think the biggest thing she gave all of us was she was just there. I mean, one of the gifts of our system of government, of a hereditary monarchy, is that it just exists. It looks after the problem of head of state. It's extraordinary to realize that we've actually moved into a new reign. It just happened the second that the Queen died, and the next one happened. But it's also, I think, really important for Canadians to understand that the King of Canada, as he is now, he rules here by the will of the Canadian people. It's not because there's some divine intervention that forces us to have a monarchy. It's because this country, through its parliament, its parliament in Ottawa and the provincial legislature, chooses to have a constitutional monarchy at the head of our constitutional system. The moment that the people of Canada don't want that, it will end. So it's an interesting act of collaboration on all levels, and although it's controversial with some people, it's not in the finite sense of what happens in our country. So actually, people will notice very little difference in day-to-day life because the crown has passed. It's the details that will start emerging and changing. We'll also all be watching how Prince Charles makes the transition to King Charles. There's never been any definition on what a Prince of Wales is supposed to do, but he's had relatively complete freedom to pursue those interests that he was interested in. That's ended now. He won't be like Her Majesty, Her late Majesty, but he will have to curtail some of his stronger opinions that will have to be passed on to his heir. He now is the constitutional monarch and has to actually don a kind of constitutional straitjacket. And we'll see him do that. I'm not in any doubt of that.
Yes, he'll have to limit some of what we have grown accustomed to over the years when he has expressed his personal views on things. There will be just formal speeches from the new king to come, so somewhat constrained in that. And the first of the addresses from King Charles III will come later today. John, in that televised address to the nation, what do you think it's important to signal with his first remarks?
Well, he'll still be grieving, and I think we'll get an element of that. We'll see that he's different from his mother. He is in those public kind of occasions. He's actually warmer, and language is probably going to be a little more colorful. But people will also be watching to make sure that he does understand his constitutional role. I think the combination of personal warmth and also assurance that life goes on as it does in any family when someone dies. That's for him to convince the country, the Commonwealth, that this extraordinary institution, it's actually an international monarchy. It's respected well beyond its borders of its realms, that this continues. This is a line of history, goes back 1,000 years, and it embellishes our lives for the most part.
So there will be discussions about that. He will have a job convincing some people of that. The personal affection for Queen Elizabeth is pretty much universal, but there are many who look to the future and wonder. So what do you think, I mean, you alluded to this, John, what do you think the discussions surrounding the future of the monarchy and Canada's place, what do you think they will look like? Maybe not right now, this is a time of intense sadness, but, not too far down the line. What are you anticipating?
Anticipate everyone watching the poor man, the microscope. You have to remember, we're now looking back over 70 years. The Queen had her ups and downs, as you well know. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the debacle of the visit to Quebec City when it wasn't actually anti-Queen Elizabeth. It was actually anti-Canada. It was the big separatist brouhaha, and people turned their backs on her and booed, and Prince Philip had to go onto national television and say, no, look, if you want to end this relationship, can we not do it civilly? And so this reign that we now look back as this continuous stream of gold, it had its ups and downs. This monarch, King Charles, will have his ups and downs. He's had lots of them. We have been privy to some of his darker moments because of the way we now intrude into people's lives. And he has weathered all that. I think it's extraordinary. I think it's actually extraordinary. He's still prepared to be king after knowing what he knows was going to happen. So he is going to be really interesting to watch. And I think people will be surprised. There's a precedent. When Queen Victoria died after a very long reign, no one had any expectations of anything but catastrophe of her successor, Edward, who became Edward VIII, because he was a playboy. He got into trouble. He was opened his mouth at the wrong place. He got involved in court scandals on libel issues. He had mistresses. And then he ended up being, in the 10 years he had, a wonderful monarch who actually was responsible for something called the Entente Cordiale, which ended 1,000 years of hatred between Britain and France. This is forgotten history to a great extent, but there's a precedent for this.
This is why we speak to you, John, because you remind us of these things. So that's interesting. So, because there are some who are wondering if he'll be a transitional king, but you're suggesting perhaps more transformative than we're even expecting.
don't know.
Who knows?
To see. But I've sent you back even to Shakespeare. You remember the transition from Prince Hal, the Prince of Wales, who was a roustabout, a troublemaker, to become King Henry V. This is not unfamiliar territory for this family.
John Fraser, thank you so much. And I think I would direct people to your website, because the Institute for the Study of the Crown in Canada has some really good articles that I think will help people understand, as you said, this unprecedented time. 90% of the census tells us 90% of the population under the age of 75. So haven't gone through something like this. There's lots to learn, lots to think about in this transition time. What happens in this country on the death of the Queen? And that's on the Institute for the Study of the Crown in Canada, of which John Fraser, a founding fellow. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be speaking again in the days to come, John.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
I want to show you some new pictures of what is happening in Scotland. There we have King Charles III. I think we look at the front seat there. You can see people leaving Balmoral. There is King Charles III. And in the front seat, Queen Consort Camilla, leaving in that car from Balmoral Castle, called there to be, rushing to be at the side of his mother ahead of her death yesterday at Balmoral, and now to London, where he will meet the Prime Minister and eventually address the nation and address the world, really, later today. We'll have coverage of that on CBC News Network. Showing how this country is remembering today, the scene in Quebec outside the National Assembly in Quebec City, the flag there at half-mast. Interesting, John just talking about one of the moments of controversy during one of the Queen's visits to that province. The death of Queen Elizabeth coming in the middle of the provincial election going on, and some party leaders cleared their campaign schedules yesterday and offered condolences at various events and online. And John Northcott is bringing us more of the reaction, not just from political figures, John, but from Canadians. 22 visits. She met many Canadians, and people are happy to share those recollections with us today.
Oh, they certainly are, Heather. Ask@cbc.ca is the address. Please keep them coming in. There have been hundreds of them. We'll show you that at the end, but we will walk through some of the stories. And we're going to show you some of the photographs that have been put up by the Government of Canada on their now open official commemoration website, including a book of condolence, looking over the years at visits that she made to this country. And we're hearing from Canadians talk about those visits. Colleen Matson talks about seeing the Queen at Woodbine during the Queen's Plate, her last attendance there in 2010, and her excitement. Of course, the Queen, a horse breeder and rider, her excitement at the races there. Rory Campbell talked about meeting her on several occasions and recalls that she remembered him each time when they met. Ruth Nicholson recalls being in straw hats and white gloves at the Dieppe Gardens in Windsor, Ontario, to meet there. Of course, Dieppe, the battle-honored not so long ago in this country, with Canadians playing such a prominent role there. We're hearing from Deb Mitchell, who grew up in London during the Blitz. She remembers the young princess talk about "Be brave, children of London, God is with you," and she said she took much from that. Gilda Spitz talked about her family growing up in an anti-Semitic Eastern Europe prior to the Second World War, and a photo of Elizabeth and Margaret taken from a magazine put on the wall as the family remembered them. We're also seeing pictures come in from our viewers. Fiona Sinclair, Victoria, BC, 1983, putting a picture in, talking about being on one leg and one arm, trying to get into the crowd. There it is, the picture there that she took then right below the Queen, with the eyes looking down and seeing this woman on the ground trying to take the picture. Vancouver City Hall, this coming in from Steve England, 1983. There, a shot of her there. Meeting Vancouver then Mayor Mike Harcourt. And finally, we'll show you a picture from 2002. This is from the Globe and Mail, a picture taken the next day. This was a woman who was there, Sharon Winchester, with her family and friends, and the shot that was then taken with the smile of the Queen as they had a conversation. She doesn't know what she said to get the smile of the Queen, but she knows she was invited there by Prince Philip. Please keep these pictures and comments coming in. Ask CBC.ca. In the meantime, as our coverage continues here, we will leave you with the comments of several former Canadian prime ministers.
In a complicated world. Her steady grace and resolve brought comfort and strength to us all. Canada is in mourning. She was one of my favorite people in the world.
I met her in 1967. I met her dozens of times. And she was always very nice and gracious, and you know, and we spent good times together. We spent one time in the north, we were 4 or 5 days together, and traveling the same little plane from Eskimo village to another one. And you know, we were three. Most of the time, Prince Philip was with the pilot in the front, and I was with the Queen and Air Marshal from the British Air Force, and the two of them were practicing their French with me for hours. So it was, she was a fantastic person.
I saw a lot of her, and both in London and at Commonwealth meetings and in Canada. And I thought that as a leader, she was an absolutely remarkable person who brought great wisdom and thoughtfulness and elegance to the manner in which she decided things and let us know when she was happy and when she wasn't. But she was, I thought she was terrific.